Clash of the Classics.
Hey everyone, that's right. It's time for Clash of the Classics, one of my favorite parts here in Horsepower for an Hour. I want to take a moment to welcome everyone. I'm Donnie.
And I'm Chris.
Great to have you guys along. If you're just joining us, perhaps this is your first time tuning us in, you're going to find that every week we roll the clock back. We pit two classic models against one another, and then we vote on the car that we like best. We look at the powertrain stuff, we look at engine stuff, we look at interior, anything that might grab our attention. There aren't any steadfast rules, I suppose. It's just kind of having fun with both of these vehicles, and it gives us a chance to kind of take a stroll down memory lane. These battles are fueled by the largest automatic transmission network in the world. They are the Automatic Transmission Rebuilders Association, or the ATRA. I want to get right into it now. Today's showdown is the 1966 Chevelle SS396 and that 1966 Dodge Charger 426 Hemi. Now, both of these cars, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners will agree, both of these cars have become iconic in the classics world, none more so than that Chevelle. So let's start with the Chevy. What the heck? The mid-'60s were a cool time in the muscle car world. Chevy was heavily experimenting back in those days with different iterations of the Chevelle. Well, here in early '66, they repositioned that Super Sport model as an all-out performance car. The overall dimensions didn't change, but they did reskin it. The SS models got a blacked-out grille. There was I think a new hood with the whole whopping non-functional vent, kind of the hood vents in it. And then also about that time, the 400 cubic inch displacement engine was pretty standard across the muscle car platform. So Chevy made the 396 the standard engine option. But instead of 375 horsepower, that one that the Z16 had, they kind of bowed that out midway through the 65. The 66s got detuned down to about 325 horsepower. But there was an engine option out there that kicked power up to about 360. It was the L34. And a lot of your listeners out there, some of you older fellas might remember, it got a taller cam. There was a bigger 4-barrel carburetor. Also cost an additional $105. So not many folks opted for that. $105 was a lot of money back in 1966.
What do you think that would equate to today?
Probably around, I would say, $1,000 to $1,200.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't opt for it either.
Yeah, I mean, well, you would have, had you known what it would be worth today, and you, for even for a moment, thought that you would be keeping the car.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate truth with humans, though, is you can't really see into the future very well.
Chevy also dropped the reinforced braking system and the underpinnings that they used in the 65 Z16 model. They went with a standard run-of-the-mill brakes and standard run-of-the-mill suspension components. An interesting thing about it, at least to me, was Chevy claimed that 66 had stiffer springs and shocks, but the truth was it really didn't. And I'm not sure how they got away with that. In fact, they might have tried to categorize it or to, claim that it was harmless hyperbole. I don't know, but it was a lie, and no matter how you tell it, a lie is a lie. But in any event, it was just the straight old standard stuff. Fast forward to the spring of '66, and Chevy releases a new iteration of the 396. They call it the L78. This thing is essentially an updated Z16 version. It's got solid lifters, new exhaust manifolds, got bigger valves. I think they even tossed in a bigger carburetor and aluminum intake manifold. And the diehard Chevy, their loyalists, they finally had the car that they dreamed about. The Chevelle SS was now a genuine big block muscle car. The cool thing, definitely to me, was the best Chevelle was still yet to come. We'll talk more about the Chevelle in coming weeks. But for today, this 66 Chevelle sold for about $4,300, went through the quarter mile at about 14 seconds, 0 to 60 in 6 seconds. And at the end of the day, all those numbers are great, but ultimately, it's the look, it's the feel, it's that whole vibe that you get of the Chevelle that make it so cool.
And you really can't beat, mid-'60s to early '70s GM products. In my opinion, they look awesome. They feel great to drive. Their power to weight ratio is just outstanding. It's really hard to beat them.
One thing I liked about the early 60s and 70s models cars, as you said, is they all had such distinction. They all had such character. They all were so individual. There was this sense of individualism for each car, and manufacturers weren't afraid to kind of roll out and try something new today. And we've talked about this many times, and I want to belabor the point here. But as we get further and further into the future, everything looks the same. It's unfortunate, but at the same time, I also understand it. But these cars can easily fetch $80,000 or more depending on the condition. So the 66 Chevelle SS 396, definitely a nice car. Let's talk a little bit more about another one. But before I go any further, I want to talk about the largest automatic transmission network on the planet. They are the Automatic Transmission Rebuilders Association. The ATRA makes our Clash of the Classics possible. No one knows transmissions better than ATRA. These guys have a member network, stretches from coast to coast. There's no better place to be when your car is experiencing transmission troubles than at an authorized ATRA service provider. Head on over to atra.com. There you'll find a service provider near you. All right, let's talk about that 1966 Dodge Charger 426 Hemi. Before I get too into this particular car, for me, the Mopar story in the mid-60s is an interesting one. It was in 1964, I think mid-64, the Plymouth Barracuda was America's first modern fastback. And a lot of our listeners even wouldn't remember that, but even have one. One of our good friends has one, Noel Salvador. He owns one. This thing is an awesome car. It beat the Ford Mustang to market by about 2 weeks. Dodge, on the other hand, waited until 66 to jump into the fastback game. But when they finally did, they launched out with some serious muscle. This 66 Charger fastback built on the Cornet platform. If you have a chance to look at it, pull over when it's easy for you. If you're at home, Google it right now. Looks just like the Cornet. Couple design differences. The most obvious is probably that sloping back window. Then the other are the hidden tail lights and that full-width tail lamp assembly out at the rear. Interior, though, is equally cool. Lots of chrome, 4 bucket seats, full instrumentation. The 318 was the base engine. And then that 383 wedge motor that was so popular for Dodge in the 60s and 70s was probably the most common performance upgrade. But strap your seatbelts on, folks, because it was 66 that Dodge introduced the Chrysler 426 Hemi. This thing definitely made for an ultimate Charger. Actual horsepower was right at about 500 ponies, even though Dodge advertised it at 425 horsepower with 10 1/4 compression, which was actually a detuned version of the 12.5 compression race Hemi. And here's the thing, even though it was detuned, this thing still ran hard, maintained solid lifters, ran a bit milder because the cam was a little shorter in it, made for better idling, had smoother low RPM running. They also added a heat chamber at the top of the engine so it could warm up properly. But all of this changes that Dodge did to make that 426 Hemi race engine into a more streetable, a tamer version. Even with all of those detunings, this engine ran good. This car, probably not my favorite looking car, but this thing really would run good.
Yeah, I'm with you on it's not my favorite looking. As far as the aesthetics go, I really prefer the later 60s to early 70s Mopar product. But with that 500 horsepower, it's a tough call at that point.
Yeah, there's one thing for sure, and I agree with you, is that marketing department. And we've talked about it before. I think it was a few months ago. It might have been longer than that. We were talking about how marketing really missed the boat in the early Dodge pickup trucks. Here's another thing that they started out with a cool little advertising promo. They called it Beauty and the Beast, which pretty cool. It's supposed to be a beautiful car with this beast of an engine, which it is. But at that point in time, they just kind of dropped the ball. Here's the reason why I'm saying that. Of the 37,344 Chargers, and I researched this before we went on today, built back in 66, only 468 buyers chose this 426 option. That tells me at the time someone missed the boat in terms of advertising it. Because if you pitch that correctly, a lot of people are going to jump on board. Now here we are, fast forward into the future, a lot of people who didn't jump on board are crying the blues because they don't have the car that they could have had in terms of value here, 50 years later, or whatever it is. But back in the day, that's when you want to sell your product. So, and we've seen it with so many other situations. Engineering does a bang-up job. It's like, whoa, they really put together a sweet ride. And then the marketing guys either don't come back from lunch or it had too many cervezas at lunch, or something gets lost along the way.
Yeah, and that's really unfortunate that a product can suffer due to marketing and exposure versus the product itself. I mean, it's one thing if you have a product that's subpar and it suffers, well, hey, get back in the drawing board and make it a little better. But just because you didn't push it hard enough, that's really unfortunate.
0 to 60 in 6 seconds in this car, 14 seconds through the quarter mile. MSRP back in '66, $5,200. Today, this car is worth probably somewhere in the $60,000 to $80,000 range. If you have this 426 setup on it, there were a couple other things that we didn't talk about with suspension and heavier duty brakes. Running out of time, but there were a lot of cool things about this car. But it's time to tell. Which car do you like here and why?
Of the two, I feel like the Chevelle is a bit better value, especially with what it's worth today. I feel like personally I would feel a little bit more at home behind the wheel of it, so I'm going to have to go with Chevelle.
Okay, so we got a two-way tie here. Even though I love the Mopar product, and I like that 426 engine, no doubt about it, and kudos to Dodge for making those detunes and still keeping the thing lively and spry. I just like the way this Chevelle looks. I just like everything about the Chevelle. It's that 66 Chevelle. We're going to talk about a 67 Chevelle in the coming weeks, but this 66 definitely one of my favorites. Today's Clash of the Classics made possible by the largest automatic transmission network in the world. They are the Automatic Transmission Rebuilders Association, or simply the ATRA. Next time your car is having transmission troubles, head on over to atra.com to find an authorized transmission service provider near you. That's it, folks. We'll see you next week.